Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. And today, we've got some really interesting stuff to dig into. We're going to be tackling the idea of mutual aid.
Okay.
And we've got some excerpts here from Peter Kropotkin's book, Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution.
Right.
And I have to say, just glancing through this, it's really making me kind of rethink some things.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Kropotkin was going for. He was really trying to challenge, that whole survival of the fittest thing.
Oh, totally. And it's like, think about when this came out, 1902, right?
Yeah, beginning of the 20th century.
So that idea of a dog-eat-dog world was very much like the main thing.
The dominant thought, yeah.
But what I find interesting is he wasn't saying Darwin was wrong or anything.
Right.
It's more like people were just missing this whole other side of the story.
Exactly. And Kropotkin really felt like even Darwin himself, especially in The Descent of Man, saw cooperation as really important.
Oh, interesting.
It's just that other folks kind of latched onto that competition part and ran with it.
So Kropotkin's like, hold on, let's get this whole picture here.
Exactly. Trying to bring some balance back.
Well, listener, get ready, because you've sent us this book that's basically arguing that working together is just as natural.
If not more so.
Yeah, and maybe more important for a species to really make it.
Yeah.
And we're talking about everything from animals to, get this, medieval guilds.
A whole spectrum.
So I'm already thinking okay, did early humans really just live in these little isolated groups that were always fighting?
Right.
And then how did they go from that to building something as complex as a medieval city?
Yeah. It's fascinating to think about.
Well, let's dive in.
Absolutely.
So to kick things off, what's the core of Kropotkin's argument here?
Well, he saw cooperation as woven into the very fabric of nature.
Okay.
He wasn't saying that, competition didn't exist.
Right.
But he really felt that its importance was being way overblown.
And he uses some pretty wild examples to prove his point.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, who knew pelicans were master collaborators?
Right. Their fishing technique is amazing.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So imagine a whole flock of them. They form this big semicircle.
Wow.
And then they slowly start tightening it.
So they're herding the fish?
Exactly. Driving them right towards the shore.
That's so smart.
It's a group effort that benefits everyone.
And it's not just pelicans, right? He talks about little birds ganging up to scare off a hawk.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Or even an eagle.
Yep.
And he even compares flocks of birds migrating to organized troops moving across the land.
Like a well-oiled machine.
It really does make you rethink that survival of the fittest thing.
It does.
Is fittest always just about being the strongest or the most aggressive?
That's the question Kropotkin's asking. He's
Yeah.
saying, look, a lot of times fitness comes from being able to work together, sharing resources, sharing knowledge.
Makes sense.
He actually says that those species that really master this mutual aid thing, they're the fittest, giving them a better chance of survival. And allowing them to develop higher intelligence.
Oh, wow.
More organization. He uses the example of those sociable cranes.
The cranes, yeah.
They live for a long time, and he really thinks it's because of their strong community bonds.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're seeing cooperation as a pretty good strategy in the animal kingdom.
Actually.
But where do humans fit into all this?
Right.
Didn't we start out in some, brutal state of nature,
Right.
Where every family was just fending for themselves?
Well, that was the popular view for a long time, influenced by folks like Thomas Hobbes.
Hobbes, right?
He imagined early humans just living in constant fear, violence,
Yikes.
like a war of all against all.
But Kropotkin's saying that's not the whole story.
Exactly. He challenged that view head on, and he had evidence to back it up.
Okay, what kind of evidence?
He pointed to, those archaeological discoveries showing that even Paleolithic humans way back in the Stone Age,
Right.
they lived in groups.
So not just lone wolf families struggling to survive.
Nope. And then he dug into all the anthropological stuff from his time,
Okay.
studying societies that were considered, primitive or savage,
Right.
like the Eskimos, the Aleuts.
So he was looking at the groups that people at the time thought were the most uncivilized.
Exactly. To see if that whole brutal, savage idea held up.
And, well, did it?
Not so much. What he found were, strong social bonds,
Okay.
a sense of fairness, systems for sharing resources, and caring for the vulnerable.
That doesn't sound very savage.
Nope. Directly contradicted that whole image of early humans as selfish and solitary.
There's that word again, solitary.
Yeah, it seems like Kropotkin wasn't buying it.
Now, I gotta say, the example of the Aleuts It was fascinating,
Oh, yeah.
but kind of jarring at first.
How so?
Well, their moral code was like, it was shameful to die without killing an enemy,
Right, right.
which seems kind of, at odds with this peaceful, cooperative society idea.
It does on the surface, right?
Yeah.
But that's why context is so important.
Okay, I'm listening.
For the Elliots, living in that harsh environment,
Right.
courage and being able to defend your community were like paramount.
So it was about survival.
Exactly. So their moral code, even though it seems contradictory,
Yeah.
it's really about finding that balance
Balance between.
between being brave as an individual
Huh.
and making sure the group survives.
So we're seeing this theme of mutual aid like throughout nature and early
Yeah.
human societies.
Definitely a pattern emerging.
But what happens when we fast forward to like more civilized times?
Right.
Let's jump ahead to the Middle Ages.
Oh, okay.
I mean, medieval cities, they were bustling, crowded,
Totally different scene.
a far cry from those hunter-gatherer bands.
For sure.
So how did cooperation play out in that kind of setting?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Medieval cities are like a perfect example of how cooperation changes and adapts to new situations.
And I'm guessing this is where the guilds come in.
Bingo. They were more than just like simple unions.
Most people probably think of them as just groups of craftsmen.
Right, like the shoemakers or the bakers.
Exactly.
But they were much more organized and complex than that.
Okay, so what else did they do?
Well, they controlled the quality of goods,
Uh-huh.
set prices, even provided support for members who were struggling.
Wow, like a safety net.
Exactly. And they didn't just focus on their craft.
Oh,
They were involved in regulating trade, setting up training programs.
so they were like mini governments.
In a way, yeah. They had a huge impact on how the whole city ran.
That's
It
impressive.
was a very cooperative system.
But here's something that's been on my mind.
What's that?
When we think of the Middle Ages, we also think of like those amazing cathedrals,
Oh, yeah.
the incredible art, the advancements in science and technology.
Right.
Could all that individual creativity really flourish
Good question.
in a system that was so focused on, rules and collective standards?
I think Kropotkin would say that the guilds actually encouraged creativity.
Really? How so?
Well, by providing stability
Okay.
and that shared sense of purpose.
Uh-huh.
Imagine you're an artist or a craftsman back then.
Okay.
If you wanted to take risks, push boundaries.
You knew you had backup.
Exactly. You weren't alone. You had a whole network supporting you.
So instead of holding people back, the guilds actually gave them the freedom to be more creative.
That's the idea.
It's like they almost paved the way for modern-day cooperatives,
It's a good comparison.
where people work together, meet their needs,
Yeah,
in a way that benefits everyone.
exactly. Shared responsibility, mutual support. That's what the guilds are all about.
So we've traced this idea of mutual aid from, animals
Yeah.
to early humans,
Mhm.
even to these complex medieval cities.
A pretty compelling case so far.
It is. But it does make you wonder, where does that leave us today?
Right.
I mean, this was all a long time ago.
Right.
Has that whole individualistic thing taken over?
Good question.
Is mutual aid just a relic of the past?
Well, it's true that, individualism is a big deal these days, but I don't think it would surprise Kropotkin all that much.
Oh, really?
Even back then, he was seeing people starting to focus more on themselves.
So he wouldn't think mutual aid just vanished?
Not at all. He believed that need for cooperation, it's just too deep in us.
Okay, so if he's right, where do we see that today? It seems like it's every man for himself out there.
I think if we just look around, we'll find mutual aid is happening all the time. Maybe not always the big splashy stuff, but it's there.
Like what?
Think about all the little acts of kindness.
Okay.
People volunteering their time, neighbors helping each other out,
Yeah,
people coming together when things get rough.
those everyday heroes, right?
Exactly.
It reminds me of that story Kropotkin tells about, like, an escaped prisoner.
Oh, yeah.
Who risked his own freedom to save a kid from a fire.
Amazing story.
It's incredible. What makes someone do that?
I think it shows just how strong that impulse for mutual aid really is.
Yeah. Even when they're already in trouble themselves.
Right. Kropotkin would say it proves that helping others can be stronger than self-interest.
So is it like a choice people make? Or is it more like an instinct?
Probably both,
Both.
We're definitely shaped by how we're raised, the values we learn.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But there's also something in us, from the beginning.
Hardwired to help.
Yeah, empathy, cooperation, that kind of stuff.
So it's nature and nurture.
Exactly. It's messy.
But even with all the craziness of modern life,
Uh-huh.
Kropotkin would say, we're still cooperating.
I think so.
Like, wow.
Think about all those clubs and organizations out there. People joining up for hobbies, sports, activism.
I guess you're right. People still want to connect,
They do.
even with deadlines, competition, all that social media stuff.
It's almost like we need to be part of something bigger.
So it's not all bad news.
Not at all. All those connections, those acts of support,
Yeah.
even the small stuff, that's what holds society together.
It's like a reminder that we're not just islands.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
It makes me wonder, what would Kropotkin think of the world today?
It's a good question.
On one hand, we're so connected globally,
More than ever.
but then there's all this isolation, people fighting over everything.
It's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
It is.
I think Kropotkin would say, be careful with all this connectedness.
You mean like the internet and stuff?
Yeah. He'd probably say, don't forget about real human connection.
Face to face.
Exactly. Especially as things get more complex.
So the same technology that can isolate us, can it also help us cooperate?
It's possible, right? Think about online platforms.
Okay.
Connecting people with similar interests.
Yeah, like those online groups.
Exactly. And think about mobilizing resources for people who need help.
Oh, right. Like when people raise money online for a cause.
That's it. Or volunteer efforts that cross borders.
So it's already happening in some ways.
It is. Crowdfunding, online support groups.
Even those social media movements for change.
See, technology can be a tool for good, too.
If we use it the right way.
That's the key.
Yeah.
It all comes down to how we use these tools.
So, thinking about our own lives, how can we be more intentional about this whole cooperation thing?
That's a good question.
How do we go beyond just reacting to problems
Yeah.
and actually like build mutual aid into our everyday lives?
That's the challenge, isn't it? What can we do in our communities?
Right.
How do we help it grow? How do we push back against that me-first attitude?
It's like Kropotkin's giving us homework.
He is. He's saying, don't just read about it. Go do something.
And it starts with understanding that we're all connected.
Exactly. What affects one person?
It affects us all.
Right. That's a powerful idea to remember.
Wow. This deep dive into Kropotkin has been really something else.
Pretty amazing stuff.
We started with like those pelicans working together,
Right? Who knew?
and now we're talking about medieval guilds.
It's quite a journey.
But it all points back to this idea that mutual aid, it's not just some nice idea, it's like a fundamental part of how we got here.
Exactly. It's woven into our history.
It's like he's uncovered this like hidden connection between everyone.
Yeah, I like that.
This thread of cooperation that runs through every society.
No matter how different they seem on the surface.
Exactly. And maybe, like,
I think it's even more important now.
with all the division and stuff,
Yeah, recognizing that connection, that shared humanity.
it could be what saves us.
Maybe.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
what's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from all this?
That's a good one. I hope they remember that mutual aid, it's not just some, like, daydream.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. It's part of who we are.
Not just some hippie ideal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's happening all around us.
We just have to open our eyes and see it.
Exactly. And once you see it,
You can't unsee it.
right, and then maybe you start doing it yourself.
Contributing to it.
That's the goal.
Well.
Building a better world together.
Well said. Thank you so much for taking us on this journey through mutual aid.
My pleasure. It's been a fascinating conversation.
And listener, we leave you with this.
Okay.
Where do you see mutual aid in your life?
Good question.
How can you be a part of it?
Yeah, how can you make a difference?
Keep those questions in mind. And until next time,
Happy cooperating.
keep diving deep.